absolutely delightful to be here today and get a chance to hear about the amazing work that's going on in Oklahoma. I feel like a lot of stuff that's on slides that I made has already been covered, but that will give us more time to spend on the ones that haven't been covered. And just in case anyone missed it, Stuebe rhymes with booby, so that's how you can remember how to pronounce my last name. That works well at lactation conferences, but I once made the mistake of introducing myself that way at the Society for Maternal Fetal Medicine. And let's just say that some people in ACOG leadership continue to greet me as, "Hi, Dr. Booby," and I'm not really sure that's a good thing. But anyway, what I want to do now is talk kind of big picture about how we can build a breastfeeding culture. And how can we sort of shift the narrative so that everybody gets behind the idea that what we want to do is help moms achieve their breastfeeding goals. And that this isn't about pitting formula feeding moms against breastfeeding moms or about making people feel guilty. It's about making it possible for anyone who wants to breastfeed to do so successfully. So we're going to talk really briefly about this concept of the socio-ecological model, which is a big word that's a pretty simple concept. And then talk a little bit about the mismatch between some of the breastfeeding promotion strategies that have been used traditionally and maternal experiences of infant feeding. And then I want to kind of step back and talk a little bit about behavior change. And many of you all involved in this process are doing QI work, and I'm sure have been exposed to lots of models about behavior change. And that I'm going to talk about a particular model that's really helped me to understand this issue a whole lot more efficiently, maybe, than how I used to think about it. So to start out with, this is the socio-ecological model. And this is a graphic from the U.S. Breastfeeding Committee. And what I want you to kind of focus on is that we have mom and baby right here. When we think about breastfeeding, obviously a mother and a baby are at the middle. But there's a whole lot of other stuff that's going to affect that mother and baby and whether or not they're able to achieve their infant feeding goals. And if we think of these concentric circles, we start out with family and friends and coworkers. We move out to clinicians and professionals and child care providers. And then all the way out on the outside are these big things, the Joint Commission, the Institute of Medicine, the U.S. Breastfeeding Committee. And we need all of these forces to align, if you will, to really optimize outcomes. And what's critically important is even when you get out to these folks in the big blue circles, these kind of entities like federal government, the federal government is comprised of individuals. And what I've come to appreciate, and I'm sure you have too, is that everybody has a story about infant feeding. Many, many people are parents, and they breastfed or didn't breastfeed, and it went well or it didn't. Everyone has been a baby. So everyone has an infant feeding story. And I think it's critically important to recognize that as we engage folks around this issue and not to try to sort of steam over that. Because if we make a comment that, formula is risky and increases leukemia chances to a mother who tried to breastfeed and couldn't, she may shut down and stop listening to us. So we need to be really thoughtful about how we approach these issues. Not to sugarcoat it, not to not share evidence, but to share that evidence in a way that appreciates everybody's got a story. So what's the problem? Well, this was an article that ran a couple years ago that many people took the time to email me. I got a hard copy in my mailbox. Have you seen this? I got lots of calls. Anyway, it was very exasperating. And basically the story was this woman had a hard time breastfeeding, and she got mad, and she looked up some of the research and decided that we were exaggerating the benefits, and she just wished she'd been told it was okay to formula feed. And this comes out periodically. There's a New York Times one this past November. Like every month, it seems, there's a breastfeeding denialism story out there about it doesn't really matter, and we're pressuring moms, and it's terrible. And there's a part of me that just wants to go, you guys are all wrong, shut up. But unfortunately, they're getting the front pages of newspapers. So, and this isn't just an American phenomenon. This was an article that ran in a Spanish magazine. And my Spanish isn't very good, but it means mother or cow, as you can see in the graphic. And there was a very unflattering portrait of breastfeeding as turning women into cows, and we should just shut up and stop making women into cows. So it's not just an American phenomenon. Well, so what do we do with this, right? Like, we're here to help moms and babies achieve their goals. We're here to reduce mortality. We're trying to make the world a better place. Why are people not getting that? And this is a really informative piece that looked at different qualitative analyses of women's experience of breastfeeding support. And this was done by a group in Australia. But I think a lot of the themes resonate with what we see here in the States. And what Virginia Smead and her colleagues suggested is that there are kind of there's sort of a light side and a dark side, if you will, to the way that women experience breastfeeding support. Here on the left is the good side. Women talked about authentic presence. They talked about feeling like their lactation support person was there for them. There was a lot about realistic information that was accurate and sufficiently detailed. It didn't say it's all rainbows and unicorns from the get-go. There was encouragement and then really practical help and proactive advice. That was contrasted with women who experienced this reductionist approach. This was one person comes in the room and says, do this other person comes in and says, don't do that, and the third person comes in and says something completely different. It was standard information where someone gave a spiel and said, this is what you have to do. It was a PowerPoint breastfeeding class where the women sat there and someone told them what they were supposed to do without ever engaging them and getting their input. People talked about feeling undermined, blamed, pressured, about people saying, look, I'm in a rush, I don't have time for this, just get your baby latched, I need to go on. And they talked about insensitive and invasive touch. And I think this is one that we really have to be careful with, because if you look at the qualitative literature, women talk about someone grabbing their boob, and they haven't previously had their boob grabbed by anyone except in very intimate circumstances. And when, even with the best of intentions to help adjust the latch, we go in and go, clunk, that's kind of troubling to people. And I think that everyone in this room has thought about this, but it's really important, particularly as we push the message out for all of the nurses in our hospital to be helping babies latch, that in addition to explaining what that looks like, that we talk about how do you say, is it okay if I touch your breast before you do it? And make eye contact with that mom before you go in and just work on the orobubular interface, because mom is experiencing a whole lot right there. And I think we need to be really thoughtful about this. So this was a really interesting quote from an essay in this fabulous book, Beyond Health, Beyond Choice. And this book comes from Breastfeeding and Feminism, which is an annual conference held in Chapel Hill that is absolutely fascinating. And I encourage you all to make the trip. We have our next meeting in March. I think it's the 20th to the 22nd. And it's feminist scholars and breastfeeding advocates in the same room, and that's a really fascinating place to be. So what Abigail Locke observed was it appears that there is a reluctance to discuss potential problems for fear of women being turned off from starting at all. While such an emphasis might work in some cases, especially if there are levels of support in place to assist breastfeeding mothers in the early days, the large number of women who cease breastfeeding in the first few weeks suggests that the level of support proffered differ or are not always taken up by mothers. And I think this is really important. You know, we want to encourage folks, but if we sort of bait and switch and say, oh, it's so easy, it's natural, it's awesome, it's going to be great, you know, you put the baby to breast and like the music will start playing, and it doesn't, which for a lot of primiparous women, it's not quite like that the first time. And she says, well, obviously there's something wrong because it was supposed to be awesome. You know, we haven't really won the game. And so I think we need to be real honest with women, not scare them, but just be honest and say, look, I like to say it's like learning to ride a bike. So if you've ever taught, how many people here have taught one of their children or nephew or niece to ride a bike? Really exasperating, right? But, you know, it's hard, and there's an act of faith involved, and you run along behind the kid, back and forth, and finally you let go, and the kid doesn't say, wah, and actually pedals. But it takes time and patience. And I think if we set that up for moms, not that breastfeeding is scary or hard or impossible, but that it takes some time, that's going to set them up for success more than if we say, oh, it's the most natural thing in the world. So I think there's this disconnect between the public health recommendation to breastfeed and the realities of infant feeding for many mothers. And to build a breastfeeding culture, we need to ensure that mothers not only know that they should breastfeed, but that they want to breastfeed and that they can breastfeed. So that's what we're going to talk about for the rest of the talk. So I want to just speak for a moment a little bit about theories of behavior change and why we do the things we do. So this draws on a number of really interesting books that come largely from the business world about behavior change. And if this piques your interest, I encourage you to look at all of these. Switch and Made to Stick are written by the Heath brothers. Influencer we'll spend a fair amount of time on this morning, and then The Power of Habit. And these are really interesting reads into how it is that people change what they want to do. And I think one of the most important things comes in the very beginning of Switch. And they talk about a company that had a problem with their purchasing. So this is kind of tedious, but I promise it's going to tie in. And the problem was that they had 150 factories, and they all ordered equipment from different places at different prices, and it was totally chaotic. And this guy was given the charge of changing this. Like, he had to come up with a policy to change it. And so his first thought was, okay, I'm going to do a PowerPoint. I'm going to show the mean and standard deviation of prices paid for each item, and I'm going to do this really convincing presentation. And you know how that's going to go, right? Like, people are going to fall asleep. So he thought, how am I going to drive home to our board of directors that this is a real problem? And so he had an intern, and what they did was to find out every kind of rubber glove purchased by every factory in this organization. And they got one of each glove, and they put a price tag on each glove. And then they put all 500 rubber gloves on the middle of the boardroom table. And they had the executives walk in, and they said, "This is our purchasing problem." And they were like, "Good Lord, are you kidding?" And they picked up the glove that was $10 and the glove that was 50 cents, and they said, "This is ridiculous. We've got to fix this." But it became something real and concrete. And I think it's really important when we're talking about breastfeeding that we share the stories of individual mothers along with the data, because data is what we make decisions on. We need to use evidence to decide what we want to do. But when we put data up in front of people, people's eyes kind of glaze over. I mean, some people really love data, and maybe they can do 5 or 6 slides of data, but a lot of people are like, "Hey, it's a bar graph. Wow." Whereas the story of an individual mother can really touch home to people. And so I encourage you, as you think about changing practice, one of the most powerful things that was said in a hospital in Massachusetts about baby-friendly was one of the nurses said, "It's so interesting. We don't hear babies crying on the unit anymore. There always used to be babies screaming in the nursery, and now they're all with their moms, and it's quiet." And I can show you data. I'll share it with you later about thermoregulation in babies who are skin-to-skin versus babies who are in the warmer. But that idea, newborns aren't in distress because we've changed our practice, is really compelling. And those newborns are not in distress whether they're formula feeding or breastfeeding. So let's talk about changing behavior. So there's this idea, and this kind of goes with the PowerPoint idea, that if we give people information, they will do the right thing. So how many people here have ever been to McDonald's in any capacity? How many people know that a salad is better for you than French fries? How many people have been to McDonald's and ordered French fries but not a salad? All right, so knowing the right thing to do and doing the right thing are not the same. And that is really important. And so Albert Bandera is one of the great thinkers who's tried to understand how people change behavior. And a lot of his work can be boiled down into these 2 questions. In order to change behavior, we need to be able to answer, is it worth it, and can I do it? And we need to be able to say yes to both questions. So is it worth it to have the salad and not the French fries? Maybe. Can I do it? Probably not. So I'm going to order the French fries. So we need to address both motivation and ability. And I think one of the biggest challenges in public health is that we spend a lot of time on motivation. We tell people how bad it is to smoke and how good it is to exercise, but we don't address any kind of how to actually make that happen. And I think breastfeeding can feel the same way in a lot of cases. So the folks who wrote Influencer sort of broke down this is it worth it, can I do it, into these 6 boxes. And what they said is it's not just a matter of is it worth it and can I do it as an individual. You also have to think about social and structural issues. And if you think about all 6 of these boxes, their takeaway was that you are 10 times more likely to change a behavior than if you just take one box. So if we talk about the health importance of breastfeeding until we're blue in the face, and we do personal motivation, we say, God, this is so good, you should really do this. But we don't address ability or social or systems, we're not going to get anywhere. We need to take this whole picture. And so what I'd encourage you to do, and what's really helped me in my work, is to draw this box for whatever behavior you're trying to change in your hospital. And we'll walk through what those boxes mean and think about, are we just looking at personal motivation, or are we getting ability and social and structural levels? And you'll be amazed how much more effective you're going to be. So we're going to walk through each of these boxes. When we talk about personal motivation, it's really about getting people to extract intrinsic satisfaction from doing the right thing. Sometimes this is just a matter of getting them to try it. For those of y'all who are beginning the skin-to-skin process, if somebody comes and puts a baby skin-to-skin at a vaginal birth or in the OR, and mom's happy and the baby does well, and somebody watches, and they're like, oh, yeah, that actually does work. That's kind of cool. Then they're willing to give it a go. And it's important, therefore, not to try it to involve completely changing their entire practice, but just doing one thing a little differently and seeing how it goes. You want to focus on a sense of accomplishment. When she puts the baby skin to skin, say, thank you so much. That was so great for that patient and that mom. I really appreciate your giving it a go. So don't be like, why didn't you do it with all the patients today? But really, positive feedback is really important. It's really important to reconnect the vital behavior to a person's sense of values. And I think this becomes really important around things like rooming in. So I have a bunch of colleagues in Boston where I did my training, and there was recently an article in the Boston Globe in defense of the newborn nursery, quoting all these mothers saying how horrible it was that they were forced to keep their babies in their rooms, and it was terrible. And I think there's a lot of energy around whether that's helping moms or hurting moms. And I think a lot of folks who have practiced with a newborn nursery for their entire careers say, well, this is awesome. I get to hold these cute babies and give them bottles, and mom is sleeping, so she's not asking difficult questions, and everyone's happy, right? Like, that's a lot easier than helping a mom latch in the middle of the night. And transitioning that to, well, you went into mother-baby nursing because you wanted to help families. And if you can help mom through that night in the room and get that baby latched and build her confidence, then when she goes home, she's going to be successful. And so that investment, instead of giving mom a nap and getting to feed the baby in, I'm going to empower this mother baby to be successful, can tap into some intrinsic satisfaction. Instead of being like, oh, those crazy breastfeeding people are making all the mothers suffer. We got to address that. And it's important to fight moral disengagement. When people say, oh, it doesn't matter anyway, to say, no, it does. And then it's important to help people who are resistant discover links between vital behaviors and their own values. So if someone doesn't want to do the program, find out why they come to work every day and try to connect their motivation to what you're trying to change. But telling them they have to do it is not going to get you there. So I think this intrinsic motivation is also really important in the way that we talk about breastfeeding. And many of you are no doubt familiar with Diane Wessinger's essay, where she argues that we need to stop talking about the benefits of breastfeeding. Because when we say there are benefits of breastfeeding, we're implying that formula is normal and breastfeeding is kind of value-added option. But instead, we should talk about the risks of not breastfeeding. And it's a powerful statement. Avoiding risk is very different than engaging benefit. And I have argued that this is a great thing, and I've written blogs about why we should talk about the risks of not breastfeeding. But I think there's some considerations that we need to take to really make sure this is the best thing for moms, and that because we don't know for sure that this actually makes mothers be more successful. And so taking into a little bit of psychology, Valorant has written on the psychology of passion. What he talks about is that there are kind of two kinds of passion, two kind of motivations for why people get up in the morning and want to do something. One is what he calls harmonious passion. So harmonious passion is that, let's say somebody loves to play the guitar, and their friends are getting together to jam one night, and this person needs to give a presentation in Oklahoma in 2 days, and says, call like, hey, I actually don't play the guitar, but work with me here. Hey, we're playing guitar, you want to come? And the person with harmonious passion will say, I'd love to, but I have this talk to give on Friday, and I really need to work on it. Definitely count me in next time. So loves playing the guitar, but doesn't let it get in the way of everything else. The person with obsessive passion is a little bit different. I'll be like, oh my God, they're playing guitar. I can't miss a guitar playing episode. I need to go. Forget about my talk. And then they're up until 3 a.m. putting their talk together the night before, and it interferes with their life. So the line here is that folks with harmonious passion know something's important, they love it, but they don't hurt themselves in the process of trying to accomplish it. So Barbara Fredrickson, who's a psychologist at UNC, has tried to think about what drives people toward obsessive versus harmonious passion. And what Fredrickson argues is that we start with a behavior, and if there are positive emotions associated with that behavior, if playing the guitar is fun and it's great to be with friends and it's collegial, that makes people kind of see the big picture, and they have broadened cognition, and they say, oh, this is great, this is a fun thing to do. And that cultivates harmonious passion. But if playing the guitar is something where if they don't do it, they feel like they're going to be bad, or maybe, they were made to practice all the time as a kid and they're afraid that they're going to get yelled at if they don't practice, or if it becomes this like, I better do it or else I'm in trouble, that will foster obsessive passion. That's the kind of thing that has athletes compete even when they're injured and make the injury worse. So when we think about this in terms of breastfeeding, this is my concern. When we talk about fear of formula as the reason to breastfeed, I'm worried that we create this narrowed cognition and create a situation where the baby's weight is down and the baby's not peeing and pooping, and mom says, I can't give formula because formula is bad, I'm just going to keep breastfeeding. Or my nipples are bleeding and they hurt like hell, but I'm just going to keep breastfeeding. When instead we emphasize that this is a nurturing relationship between mother and baby, and that all moms nurture their babies, and nurturing at the breast has an intimacy and a power to it that is amazing. And we focus on that piece, then that may foster a more harmonious relationship between infant feeding. And so I think it's important to talk about the risks of supplementation. And it's important to make folks understand that if you've got plenty of breast milk's a whole lot better than formula, so don't give formula. But if you don't, and we know a large proportion of women have delayed onset of lactogenesis, if we've set up this idea that we've poisoned the baby's gut for 2 months if we give the kid a tablespoon of formula, and then the kid needs to be supplemented, I think some moms are going to say, well, to hell with it. I've already ruined the child, so I might as well just formula feed. So we need to be really thoughtful, particularly in our high-risk moms who are obese, who have gestational diabetes, who have a history of difficulty breastfeeding, to talk about, let's have a nurturing relationship with the breast and get your baby as much of your milk as is feasible. And then if we have to supplement, we'll deal with that, as opposed to formula is rat poison, which I do not think is a useful health message. And so when we think about a more positive message, Best for Babes, how many people are familiar with Best for Babes? So this is a great website, and they have a really wonderful kind of take on feeding. And they have this ad campaign, the miracle isn't the bra. The miracle is you and the milk only moms can make. Whether you breastfeed, use donor milk, or neither, finding the right support can make all the difference. Best for Babes will cheer you on and help you navigate the booby traps, the barriers that keep mothers from achieving their personal feeding goals. And I think this is a really positive message that is about enabling mothers instead of about saying, you better do this or else. So that's personal motivation. We also need to think about personal ability. And it's really important to teach people how to do the thing you want them to do. This goes for mom latching her baby. This goes for the nurse going in at 3 a.m. to talk to the mom who's freaking out. We need to practice that and rehearse it in low-risk situations. So thinking about this specifically, we really need to teach infant cues. And I was thrilled to see the great infant cue handout that's on the Oklahoma Breastfeeding Resources website. So this, you may or may not recognize, this is me. And this is my firstborn. He's cueing, if anyone isn't aware of that. And I know because there's a video of this moment that the resolution's a little crappy or I would show it, that I'm saying, well, I just breastfed you for 15 minutes on the left side so you can have the other breast in 3 hours. And he's going, and I'm actually saying, wow, you're sucking on your fingers. That's kind of cool. I had no idea. I was a fourth-year medical student. I was going into OBGYN. I'd read a lot of books, but means feed me had not filtered into my brain. And no one in the room, my doula, my husband, my nurse, said, actually, he's cueing. You can go ahead and offer the breast again. So we need to teach that. By the time my third was born, I not only knew what cueing was, but I was smart enough to take a picture to use in breastfeeding talks. So this is Max. And right after he did that, I put him to breast, but I got out my phone first. And one of the great lessons that for teaching this, in addition to the wonderful handouts and informative tools that Krista Bridges-Jones from Arizona has taught me, is that your baby has a fuel gauge. This is empty. This is full. This means I might want dessert. And I think sometimes here are the 12 different faces of baby cueing is a lot to internalize on postpartum day one, particularly if you've had a long induction and a lot of pushing and all that kind of stuff. Empty, full, dessert. Really easy for parents to get. And I think that's a helpful kind of thing to say, oh, okay, I understand. And yes, there are nuances to it, and there's this, but empty, full, dessert. And I think going over that is critically important. There's wonderful material from Jane Heinig in California, which teaches baby cues and talks about helping parents understand what their babies want. And what they found in their formative work was a lot of supplementation happened when the baby did something and the parents couldn't figure it out, so they stuck a bottle in the baby's mouth because that shut up the baby because there was a bottle in their mouth and they couldn't yell. But we really need to teach this proactively, and I think she's done some WIC trainings. Does WIC Oklahoma use this resource? Yeah, so it's a great resource. So we also need to teach the nurses. And these are some scripts from Stanford. Stanford's newborn nursery has done some wonderful work on actually scripting language that providers can use when talking about challenges. So this is the script for no latch in 12 hours. The baby steps of learning will come more naturally if you keep him skin to skin with you and just practice breastfeeding. There are lots of things we can do to help him learn. Most babies do lots of sleeping in the first day. So normalizing that, giving mom some reassurance that all is not lost. Your baby is just recovering. Your baby's trying to figure out the world. You're doing a great job. This is a learning time for both of you. So helping moms helping the nurse to know what to say, and then helping moms to have a story that it isn't that I failed miserably. It is that, the baby's tired and we're not quite there yet, but we're going to get there. Because I think one of the hard things that happens when we experience a setback is we can just kind of panic and say, oh my God, I'm a complete failure. I can't do this. It's all over. Instead of saying, well, oh, that didn't go great, but, we're going to try again. And I think this comes in Virginia Schmid's work. As she says, when information was not realistic, however positively intended, it was not viewed as supportive, particularly when women encountered difficulties. And this is a quote from a mom. You were told over and over again that there's only pain if the baby is not attached properly. Well, I'm sorry, but I beg to differ. And I think the pain piece, Tina Smiley has taught me to talk about pain not as in if it hurts, you're doing it wrong, because what's that story, right? Like you're in pain and you suck. but rather to say, if it hurts, it's your body telling you to adjust the baby's position. She uses the analogy, if you're walking down the street and there's a pebble in your shoe and it hurts, you're not walking wrong. Your body wants you to take the shoe off and remove the pebble and then put the shoe back on. And so if baby is latched and it's uncomfortable, that's a cue to check and say, well, gosh, is the kid trying to feed like this because I've got his body this way and his head that way? Or, do I need to release the latch and adjust? So teaching that pain is a clue and a cue as opposed to a sign of screwing up, I think can be really helpful to mothers. So we now need to move to the social level, and we need to use peer pressure. So I have a kid in middle school and a kid in high school. I don't like peer pressure in that context, but when it comes to changing practice, peer pressure is critically important. And so we need to identify and work with opinion leaders, and we'll talk about what makes an opinion leader in a moment. It needs to be safe to talk about high-stakes, controversial topics. So if there are a couple of nurses who think it's abusive not to send every baby to the nursery, you better get that out there during the process, because they're still going to think that even if they don't say it out loud, and they're still going to whisper it to everybody after the meeting. So you need to say, so what concerns do people have about this? This is a big change. What do you think is going to be difficult? And let people speak up and discuss it, because trying to just not talk about it does not make it go away. And then it's really important to create new social networks to support this behavior change. So I think the interesting thing about opinion leaders is these folks are not necessarily the nurse manager or the department chair or anyone in a titled position of power. The opinion leaders are the people that, if you think back to middle school, there were certain kids that if they wore a particular pair of shoes to school on Friday, half the class had those shoes on Monday, right? Because they were cool. And there are those people in clinical medicine. There are clinicians who, if they say, you know what, I am going to use this new med, or I am going to try this new approach, everyone's like, ooh, if that person's doing it, then it's cool and I want to do it too. And it's critically important to know who those folks are, because I will tell you, if those people are not on board with whatever you're trying to change, it is not going to happen. They're typically trusted by community members. And one of their features is that if you ask that person a question, they will pause a moment, provide a succinct and useful answer, and then say, how else can I help you? So they're approachable and they're willing to share their ideas. And there are standardized instruments that you can put out a survey and find out who the opinion leaders are if you don't kind of know it intuitively. And you want those people on your team, because you're not going to get very far without them. So in talking about these high-stakes controversial topics, there's this concept that we need to really portray the reality of breastfeeding. And Locke talks about the fact that a lot of prenatal breastfeeding classes are more advocacy than they are preparation. And I think that many of you are probably doing prenatal teaching. We'll talk a little bit in my second talk about some tools to do that. But if we get up and just talk about how great this is without discussing the controversial topics and without engaging the mom who says, well, I tried last time, it was a disaster, it hurt like hell, and I quit. I don't want to do it. And you don't address that with her, she's not going to change her mind. And so it's really important that we're having a dialogue and that we're treating our moms as adult learners, not as folks who are being lectured at in our education efforts. So we talk about creating community. This was an awesome picture from the Facebook page of the Baby Cafe here in Oklahoma City. I think this is Oklahoma City. And we want to create a safe space for moms who maybe no one in their family has ever breastfed. And one of the beautiful things about Baby Cafe is here is a place that moms can come and meet other moms who are breastfeeding and get peer support for this new behavior that they might never have tried, and they may not have any support in their usual social networks. So I think it's critically important to have outpatient support. A phone number is awesome, and I am deeply envious of your 1-800 number. If moms from North Carolina call that, what will happen? Will they not get a call back? All right, I won't spread that too much, but I already tweeted the phone number, but I won't give you guys too many people. But I think we need those spaces for moms to come together and get support and hear from the mom of the 6-month-old that, oh my God, the first 2 weeks were really hard, but now it's awesome. And see the 6-month-old who latches while mom is having a conversation and drinking a cup of coffee. And then the mom of the 2-week-old can be like, all right, I can do this, because those peers are critically important. And peers aren't just for moms who are not experienced with breastfeeding. This is Dr. Milk. Dr. Milk is a peer-to-peer support organization for breastfeeding physicians. And you would think, well, physicians don't need peer-to-peer support. Well, actually, physicians don't know anything about breastfeeding, which you probably do know. Laurie Jones, who founded Dr. Milk, is a pediatrician in Arizona. And when she had her first baby, she had a horrible time with breastfeeding. And she was mortified that she was a pediatrician and she couldn't figure out how to breastfeed her kid. And she was embarrassed to ask lactation consultants because she was like, oh my God, I'm a pediatrician, I'm supposed to know all of this. And of course, the lactation consultants knew the pediatricians don't know any of this, but be that as it may. So she created Dr. Milk, and they have face-to-face peer stuff in a couple cities around the country. There's a very, very active Facebook page where moms chime in with either, I'm so excited I got to a year, and they get 300 likes for that, or they share photos of each other's babies, they share their stories, they share their frustrations. And Laurie goes so far as to match people that if you're a second-year anesthesia resident and you're going back after your maternity leave to the cardiothoracic surgery rotation, she can find a cardiothoracic, an anesthesia person who breastfed during her cardiothoracic surgery rotation in another state and give peer-to-peer advice. So I would encourage certainly any physician moms that you work with or any physician moms in the room to join Dr. Milk because it's a great actual support for one's own work. And then also it sort of gets clinicians, I think, thinking more broadly about how to help breastfeeding. So that was about sort of motivation on a community level. You also need ability on a community level. You need a network to support you. And some of that can mean involving the people who are not necessarily supportive in being supportive and bringing them over to the light side. It's about turning disablers into enablers and then creating teams and ensuring solidarity. So teams include dads. And these are pictures of my husband and Noah, who's now 15 and is probably mortified that I put these pictures up. But I was an intern when my first kid was born the night before the match in medical school, so you get an envelope the next day saying where you're moving to, and I was 12 hours postpartum. And I started my residency with a 3-month-old. And Jeff would bring him to visit. There was one day I had a quiet afternoon. I had the pager. I think you can see the pager in the picture here. And we went to there's like this pretty grassy area by Longwood Medical Center. And so I'm taking a nap and breastfeeding with the pager on in my scrubs. And then this is Noah coming while I'm answering a page, and he's having lunch, and I'm writing clinic notes. So that couldn't happen without a partner who was invested. And so helping to engage those folks and tell them they're important is really, really important. There's a great quote from Justin Forsett at one of the first food forums where he says, "What I've learned now that Judah is 15 months is that like football, breastfeeding is truly a team sport. Angie always has the ball, but it's still my job to be 100% supportive even from the sidelines." So obviously powerful for an NFL football player to be endorsing not only breastfeeding, but being a dad who supports breastfeeding. This resource is linked to from the Oklahoma Breastfeeding website, and I haven't looked at it in detail, but I figured y'all picked it, so it must be good. And this is a whole Canadian resource for dads that tries to get at the idea of dad as the tech-savvy guy. So it's 24-hour cribside assistance, so that dads can be supportive in their videos and clips about supporting breastfeeding. So I think that it's really important that we not say to dad, well, you can change diapers, and that's cool, because that's really not cool, right? Like mom gets the head, you get the butt. Not a very engaging idea. But rather talk with dads about how they can be helpful. And there's some interesting work showing that dads are treated pretty poorly in postpartum and in intrapartum, that providers walk in and they put their back between dad and the mom and pretend he's not there, that they don't make eye contact with him, they don't introduce themselves, they're kind of like, oh, you're just dad. So anyway, mom. So I think when we come into the room and talk to mom and then look at dad and say, how do you think things are going? Like, what questions do you have? And then show dad if you're helping to position baby, like, here, let me show you how to help with this, because you're going to be the go-to when y'all go home. So, and there's good evidence that teaching dads prenatally can be really powerful. Grandmas, awfully important, right? How many people have seen grandmothers either make it or break it for a breastfeeding mom? So sometimes it's make it, so I want to be fair. Not all grandmas are a problem. But this was some interesting work by Jane Grassley looking at what mothers need and want from grandmas. And I think it's not the full story, but again, if grandma is in the room, you damn well better introduce yourself. And I will often ask sort of, well, what have you heard about breastfeeding? And grandma usually pipes up, and if she doesn't, I encourage her to. Because if grandma's got some opinions, she's going to state them when I leave the room. So we might as well talk about it while we're all in the same room together. So I think it's really important to think about mom's support team and make sure that they're engaged. So then we move on to structural motivation. So we've got individual, community, and now structures. And there's some important principles here. And I think the most important one is that we want to start with intrinsic and social motivation. If we tell folks, well, you have to do exclusive breastfeeding because the Joint Commission is measuring PCO5, so don't give the kid formula. You could imagine, and I'm a little cynical, but you could imagine the provider being like, all right, we're going to discharge you because your baby needs to be supplemented, but we don't want to screw up PCO5, so if you can just pick up some formula on the way out, that would be awesome. They have it at CVS. Bye-bye. right? And that is not why that's not what we're trying to do. We're not trying to, kick people out so they can supplement. We're trying to support women to use supplementation only when indicated. So we need to get people motivated about why exclusive breastfeeding is important. We need them to believe they're invested in moms being successful. And then say, and one of the ways we're going to see how this is working is whether we're doing less supplementation. But if you just say you have to, people are going to do it as skimpily as they possibly can. So I think it's also really important to reward good behavior, and the evidence shows that rewarding positive behavior is a lot more effective than yelling at people who are not doing what you want them to do. Best for Babes made these "Thanks for breastfeeding, we're cheering you on, babe" cards that you could hand to breastfeeding mothers when you see a mom out and about. And I don't necessarily carry the cards, but I will go up to women and say, "Oh, what a beautiful baby. It's so great to see you breastfeeding." Because it takes guts to breastfeed in public, right? And rather than snarling at the women who aren't breastfeeding in public, which I have a real issue with people doing, congratulate the people who are doing the good behavior. Jen Thomas is a pediatrician in Wisconsin, and at 1 year, she gives kids a Got Breast Milk t-shirt if they're still breastfeeding. And then she has a wall of fame in her office with pictures of all these 1-year-olds wearing their Got Breast Milk t-shirts, which provides moms with this kind of like goal of, I want to get to that point. And it isn't exclusive breastfeeding until 12 months. It isn't no formula to 12 months. It's breastfeeding to 12 months. And she says it's really important to do the 12-month-olds because she wants to show that big kids breastfeed. It's not just a newborn kind of thing. And then it's important for us to thank our colleagues when they go the extra mile. And I have a stack of these thank you cards that I will send to people who go out of their way to help a mom with breastfeeding or to help with another kind of issue where they went above and beyond to get things done. And in this era of everything being a tweet or a text or an email, actually getting a piece of paper where a pen has been applied and words have been written is an incredibly powerful token of appreciation. You don't need to give them a free trip to the Bahamas. You don't need to give them a Starbucks gift card. But just to write on paper, "Thank you so much for taking extra time with Susie Q and her baby last week. I know it meant a lot to her and it meant a lot to me that you made that investment." So get a stack of thank you notes at Target and keep those in your back pocket. So the last box is structural ability. And here's where we have to think about how subtle cues from the environment influence behavior. It can be really important to make the invisible visible, to make sure people know that breastfeeding is happening in public. It's not only happening behind closed doors. And then think about ways to create opportunities for informal contact and communication. So I have a couple of examples. What's this? So I talk a lot about obesity and metabolic syndrome and breastfeeding effects, and how many women with a BMI of 30 can fit that around their waist? And so what does it tell a woman with a BMI of 30 if she's provided with a boppy pillow about whether she's supposed to be breastfeeding? Only skinny people are supposed to breastfeed because this pillow doesn't fit around me. And I think those are subtle things that we need to be aware of. The My Breast Friend, I don't get endorsements from anybody, and I don't take money from any object manufacturer. But when we show people things that suggest that you need to be skinny and fit to breastfeed and only skinny fit people do it, that sends a message that we need to be really careful about. From a structural standpoint, we also have to appreciate that the mother-baby is a two-person organ system that's breastfeeding. How many people have Epic at their hospital? So how many? I know in Epic you can put the lactation note in mom and baby's chart at the same time. There are a lot of bad things about Epic, but that is a good one. So we'll focus on the positive here. And I think there's an opportunity to communicate that. And if you don't have an EMR that does that, there needs to be a way for the mom's provider to know if breastfeeding is going off the rails. And so if that means copying a note or routing a note or sending an in-basket or whatever, we need to make sure the mother provider and the baby provider are in sync when we talk about milk feeding. This was a campaign in California where they made cardboard cutouts of women breastfeeding in public, and they positioned them around the neighborhood so that, this guy's walking by and doing a double take because there's a life-size breastfeeding mom breastfeeding in public. The similar project was done in the Bronx that was really awesome, and there was a whole funny story when I was at the Bronx Breastfeeding Coalition that there's a mother holding a baby, and her kid hates it because she sees her mother holding another baby. Now the kid's like 3, and it's like, what? And it's from her. Anyway. But this is a really fun thing to do, and a number of folks have done it, and you can kind of position those around in strategic spots and have people just get used to seeing breastfeeding in public. This is from a project here in Oklahoma that was done, I think, for World Breastfeeding Week last week by Sarah Dragman Photography, and she was kind enough to give me permission to use the images. So here you see a mom breastfeeding. Note she doesn't have a BMI of 22, like she's a normal person. And you can see they're just people kind of hanging out and walking around, and this just happens in public. And showing those images is really important to get beyond the idea that breastfeeding only happens like behind closed doors with a bag over your head. It's important to show images of women that are not all Caucasian breastfeeding. And this is from a blog on Black breastfeeding moms. We need to show diversity in those pictures, because if we only show skinny white women breastfeeding, a lot of the population is not skinny and not white, and they will say, well, this isn't for me. This is a beautiful image of a not skinny woman that I found online that I think, again, shows that breastfeeding isn't something you do just if you have, a perfect life and a BMI of 21 and you also run marathons and eat only organic food. And then one of my favorites about bringing visibility is the milk truck. And this was a project done in Pittsburgh a couple of years ago, and they built this amazing truck that has a little boob on top. And the milk truck was sort of designed to address the issue of people being thrown out of businesses for breastfeeding in public. So here's how the milk truck works. So say you're a mom and you're at a diner and you're nursing your baby, and the owner comes up to you and is like, please go do that in the bathroom. You're causing a ruckus. The mom calls the milk truck. The milk truck pulls up in front of the diner with the boob siren on top. And the back of the milk truck has this super comfy, plush nursing space for the mom and the baby. And meanwhile, the business, which was trying not to make a ruckus, is called out for being a boob. So it's pretty awesome. And I actually aspire to having a baby food truck that has a boob on top to drive around to community events. I haven't figured out who's going to fund that yet, but if anyone has any ideas. So it's also so important to bring people together for informal communication. And we have a weekly team meeting at UNC with nurses and lactation consultants and providers. We call it Breastfeeding at the Beach, not because there's any sand or salt involved, but the cafe is called the Beach. And we sit around a table and we just talk. There's not a formal agenda, there's not a checky box list, but it's this opportunity to hear about what's going on and talk about, well, gosh, I saw this mom in the NICU, and this happened and that happened, and how do we deal with that? And then out of it comes changes to protocols and improvements. But before we did this, I worked with the LCs, but we would sort of, they would page me and they would be worried they were bothering me, and I would be saying, well, no, it's fine. But we just didn't have an opportunity to kind of vet things and talk. And so as you go through your baby-friendly QI projects, I would encourage you to, in addition to those scheduled meetings, have, Becoming Baby-Friendly lunch on Fridays, where you all go to the cafeteria or go to someplace and have lunch and chat about the wins and the losses and the frustrations, and that creates a real sense of community. So when we talk about addressing breastfeeding challenges, we need to think about all 6 boxes. We need to think about the personal, the social, and the structural. And we need to answer both, is it worth it, and can I do it? And I think there's some cautionary tales of what happens when you don't think about all the boxes. This is a paper that I imagine some people who are not a fan of the pacifier step might have brought to you, that looked at, they stopped pacifiers in the mother-baby unit, and they found that the exclusive breastfeeding rate actually went down. That's not supposed to happen, right? Taking away pacifiers is part of baby-friendly. Take away pacifiers, more breastfeeding, more baby at breast, more milk stimulation. What? Well, if you look at the study, at what they did, they used personal motivation. They said if you give your healthy newborn a pacifier, it can make it harder for your baby to learn to breastfeed and decrease your milk supply. Personal motivation. But they didn't say what to do if your baby was fussy and frustrated. There was no script instituted to instruct parents on infant soothing techniques or use of pacifiers. So, I'm sorry your baby's screaming, but no pacifiers. Good luck. And they locked up the pacifiers. They made they changed the environment. But what happened was parents had nothing, they had no outlet, right? They had a screaming baby, and so where could they get a nipple stick in the baby's mouth? Formula. So they got formula instead. And I think it speaks to the fact that if you're going to do personal motivation and you're going to change the environment, you need to think about all these other pieces. And we need a script for those moms to say, if your baby's fussy, put them skin to skin. If you're exhausted, put them skin to skin with the other grown-up in the room. But saying, no pacifiers, good luck with that. Doesn't work. So now I want to show a quick video, which I think beautifully explains the importance of the 6 sources of influence. And I hope, do I have enough time for a 5-minute video?
What you're about to see is real. Real kids doing real things. Just thought you should know. My name's Hiram Grenny, and I was there for the whole thing. So here's a question. What does it take to get people to change? And I'm not talking about their socks and underwear, but change behavior, especially when it's hard. For example, every year close to 100,000 people die from hospital-acquired infections. That means people got sick at the hospital. And it turns out one of the main culprits is hand hygiene. That means just getting people to wash their hands could save lives. So my crack research team decided to conduct an experiment to see if we could change something as difficult as hand washing habits, only with the toughest subjects of all, kids. So here's what we did. We took 80 munchkins and put them into groups. First, we gave them a challenging puzzle to put together. You know, kind of like the projects you adults are always busy with. Then, we gave the kids a tempting distraction.
Hey guys, I got the cupcakes for you right here. They're delicious. I'm gonna set them right over here.
Once I see that you guys have put the whole puzzle together correctly, I'll raise my flag, just like this, and then I'll blow my whistle. Okay? And when I do that, you guys can all go and get your cupcake. So what would it take to get these kids to wash their hands? How about a good reason? So one thing you guys should know, there was a sick kid in here playing with the puzzle pieces. He had a runny nose and coughed a lot, so there's probably a lot of germs on everything. But there's hand sanitizer over there on the table that you can use to wash up. Okay, which will win out? Delicious frosted cupcakes or the fear of the typhoid toddler? Let's watch. They finished their task, and look, if the threat of one sick kid wasn't enough, just look at all the new germs popping up. So with all those good reasons to wash, what do you think they'll do? Okay, so that was a colossal failure. Now what? Well, at this point, most adults would quit. That's why you just keep changing the year on those New Year's resolutions. With the next group of kids, I changed the environment by moving the hand sanitizer closer, and then put up a visual cue. This ought to make hand washing easier and more obvious, right? And in the end, the motivation to not get sick plus changing the environment didn't influence a single kid. Yikes! Next, I increased their ability, which is another source of influence. I had them all complete what is known as deliberate practice, or training, to increase their familiarity with good hand hygiene. Will adding another source of influence get these hand-washing offenders to wash up? Done. And... well, now we're seeing some better results. We're combining 3 different sources of influence, and some of the kids are actually washing their hands. It looks like we're on the right track. So next, I added another source of influence, social influence. What if somebody spoke up and said something? What would happen if their bosses were in the room with them? Here come the cupcakes. And there goes the flag. Will they wash? No! Look at them pouncing on those cupcakes like a pack of ravenous hyenas. But it's not too late, because something important happens. At just the critical moment, a peer, not even one of the bosses, speaks up.
Wash your hands.
Watch the effect. Success at last! So social motivation obviously made a difference. But was it the only thing that mattered? What about our other sources of influence? Here's what my kids had to say.
This time, I was walking over to get my cupcake, but then someone said, wash your hands, because this boy had the sniffles in here.
So what's the point? We often underwhelm overwhelming problems. We try a couple of things, and when they don't work, we give up. But my dad and his colleagues discovered the secret to overcoming tough problems. You need to combine at least 4, preferably more, sources of influence. And it doesn't matter if you try it with kids or hospitals, at the office, or even at home. If you use 4 or more sources of influence, your chances for success go up 10 times. 10 times! So there it is. The key to changing almost anything is to marshal the power of at least 4 or more sources of influence, but preferably all 6. And heaven knows, we need it.
So this is available online. It's on YouTube, and I would encourage you to show it to your colleagues. I think it really makes the point in an entertaining and succinct fashion. And I've put a bunch of different resources, including that clip, on a Pinterest board. I'm not really a Pinterest person, but there are a bunch of different examples of photos, of images, of ways of addressing all 6 sources of influence, including a link to the video. So if y'all want to look for some ideas there, that's a resource to kind of pull all of this together in addition to the stuff that's here. And Vital Smarts does an influencer training, and that's supposed to be really, really good. It's fairly expensive, but I don't know if they come to Oklahoma regularly, and if I had been more thoughtful, I would have found out and been able to officially pitch that. I also don't get paid by them, but I use their stuff in my talks, so I feel like I should at least acknowledge that. And I'd encourage you to get a copy of the book, because it really does give you some ideas about how to think about how to get folks to change what they do. So with that, I'm going to close and take questions. I think the critical piece of this is that it does take a village, and as they say in Swahili, a single hand cannot nurse a child. So thank you so much for your attention, and I'd be happy to take some questions. Yeah.
So you talked about not focusing more on the benefits of breastfeeding than focusing on the risks of formula feeding. How do you do that and not create that fear?
And can you repeat the question?
Yes, so the question was, how do you balance the language about the benefits of breastfeeding, the risks of formula, and not create a fear of formula? You know, I have an approach. I don't have, an evidence-based randomized controlled trial proving that this works. I think one way to talk about it in prenatal care is to say, our goal is just breast milk. It's got all these great things in it. Sometimes moms and babies run into trouble and milk comes in a little bit later, and then we may need a little bit of formula as a bridge. And when baby's weight is down or when mom's milk is coming in late, we use a small amount of formula just to get you over the hump until you can get back to breastfeeding. But if you've got milk, your milk is just so much better than the stuff that you get. And I'll sometimes talk about, you can do home cooking, you can do McDonald's. In a pinch, sometimes you got to stop at McDonald's, but we'd much rather feed our kids home-cooked food than McDonald's. And that kind of acknowledges that it's available. Another analogy I've thought about is thinking about it like antibiotics. So if you've got bacterial pneumonia, you need to take antibiotics. And yes, you may get diarrhea and you may get a yeast infection, but you have bacterial pneumonia. If you've got the common cold and you want antibiotics because you want to do something because it's annoying you that you're sneezing, you will get a yeast infection and you will not get better. And so we like to use things when they're indicated, recognizing that it's an intervention. But I think it's a moving target, and I think I have become less and less enthusiastic about talking about the risks of formula and more enthusiastic about talking about nurturing and connection and breastfeeding. I also think it becomes important. In my clinical practice, I have a clinic for what I like to call lactastrophe. Has anyone seen lactastrophe? The LCs in the room know what lactastrophe is. That's when it all goes to hell and everyone's completely freaking out. And so I see a lot of moms who are trying their darndest and pumping and taking 17 herbs and are not meeting 100% of their baby's needs. And I like to say you can nurture your baby at the breast no matter what. And if some milk comes out, great. And if it doesn't, but you guys both enjoy it, that's awesome. And I think that idea that if we start going head-to-head with the formula companies on the ingredients in breast milk, of course, breast milk has a whole bunch of stuff that formula doesn't, but then we're really just comparing two products. When we talk about nurturing and relationship, we're not trying to compete on their playing field. We're competing on our own terms. And so I think talking about that nurturing relationship can be really helpful. But it's a hard thing.
Other questions for Dr. Stuebe?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Barbara? You may be addressing this more in your second talk, but when you talk about building a breastfeeding culture, I don't see any medical providers here. I don't know. There could be a doctor in here.
There's a physician in the room.
And I think it's a big missing piece of our puzzle. And it's like, how can we influence physicians, medical students to be a part of this movement in this culture?
So it's a great question. So the question was, how do we engage physicians in being part of building a breastfeeding culture? And I think there are a couple things. One really important piece, I think, is when a physician mother is starting out breastfeeding, to engage her and to, come extra. I mean, Mary Rose Tully, who was a fabulous lactation consultant at UNC for many years, would go to do home visits for physicians because she knew that she really needed them to have a good breastfeeding experience. And not that everyone doesn't need one, but they're going to resonate out to the rest of the world. And if they have a miserable breastfeeding experience, they're going to blow it off for their patients. And if they have a great breastfeeding experience, they're going to be engaged. They're also going to say, wow, lactation consultants are awesome. I need to use them. So I think that that's really important. And that's where I think Dr. Milk is so powerful. And I think that it's also important to build it into continuing education and into medical school. So I've inserted myself into the med school curriculum at UNC, but I think across the country, many medical schools give short shrift to breastfeeding, or they have one talk that's in the OB rotation. But we cover the rest of human physiology, and most med schools have a lecture on breast cancer, and they don't talk about the breast as a functional organ. And so I think starting to teach that as this is part of reproductive physiology, it's not some like goofy add-on thing that we don't have to pay attention to. And part of what I was really happy made it into the ACOG statement was the statement that lactation is a fundamental part of reproductive physiology. It is not some extraneous afterthought. And we wouldn't not teach pregnancy in med school, so we should not teach breastfeeding. So I think that's a really important piece. But yeah, and then I think finally, in that note, the thank you note thing, when a physician does go out of their way to help a mom, that handwritten thank you note will make them feel really good, and they'll implicitly, if not explicitly, want another one, so they will do better. So calling out good behavior and engaging people individually. I think to take a whole day out to go to a conference is hard for clinicians, particularly when there's not continuing medical education credit. So it may be that you have to go to them or invite that one clinician who helped out to a committee meeting, but you need to kind of get people in little dollops. So there was a question here, I think, and I know I have a minute. Somebody raising their hand? Other questions?